Okay, so you know how we're always talking about leveling up your skills and knowledge and all that?
Yep.
Well, today we're tackling something that I know a lot of you out there have been wanting to dive into.
Oh, really? What's that?
Learning English.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
It is a huge one, and I know for so many people, whether it's for work or for travel or just, connecting with people from different cultures, English can feel like this kind of massive mountain to climb.
That's
right?
sure. It can be really intimidating language to learn.
It is, and I've heard from so many of you that you're looking for a way to kind of like hack it.
Yeah, you want to find that shortcut.
Yeah, exactly. Like, how can we learn this thoroughly, but also like efficiently?
Right, like respecting the time and effort that it takes.
Exactly.
Well-
So that's why we're doing this deep dive today.
Awesome.
We're going to be looking at an article that was published recently, actually, on February 14th, 2025.
Oh, wow. Valentine's Day.
I know, right? On Fast Info Class.
Okay.
And it's called Learn English Fast in 10 Effective Ways.
Learn English fast. I like it.
Yeah, so think of this as us kind of like going through that article together and pulling out the really valuable stuff.
Yeah, like the gems.
Yeah, exactly. Because we've read it, we've analyzed it, and now we're going to talk about how you can actually use these tips to improve your English and feel good about your approach,
Was
right?
really confident in the process.
Exactly. And hopefully we can uncover some of the maybe less obvious benefits of these 10 recommendations.
Yeah, and the stuff that they don't always tell you.
Exactly.
All right.
So the first thing the article talks about, and this might seem really basic, but it's super important, it's
Bro.
listening.
Yeah.
They call it the first and crucial step for learning quickly.
Which makes sense when you think about it.
It does.
Sure.
Why is that? Why is just tuning in like that so important?
Well, I mean, think about it. How do we all learn language in the first place?
As babies. Yeah.
Exactly. Like babies are listening to sounds and rhythms way before they can even like form words.
Right.
So in the context of learning English, being a good listener isn't just about understanding the words themselves.
Right.
It's about picking up on those underlying patterns, right? The sounds, the basic vocabulary, the natural flow of the grammar.
Oh, so it's more than just recognizing the words themselves.
It is. It's about like the music of the language almost.
I like that.
Yeah. And even, those little shifts in pronunciation that can totally change the meaning of something.
That's true.
So it's like laying the groundwork for everything else you're going to learn.
It's that foundation.
Exactly.
Okay, so the article gives some pretty practical advice for how to get better at listening.
I feel like what?
One of them is watching movies and videos in English with the subtitles on.
Oh, yeah, that's a classic.
It is. So how does that help our brains, like, really absorb the language, having both the audio and the text at the same time?
Well, when you're seeing the words and hearing them spoken at the same time,
Yeah.
it creates like these multiple pathways in your brain.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and that helps you process the information better.
Oh, I
It's
know.
called dual coding. So your brain's basically like, oh, okay, that sound looks like that.
Yeah, and it makes it more.
Exactly. The words become stickier in your memory.
Yeah.
And, especially when you're starting out, subtitles can be really helpful because they give you that context.
Right, it's not so overwhelming.
Yeah, you're not just like lost in a sea of sounds.
Exactly. Okay, so they also suggest listening to like podcasts and radio and even the news in English. So what's the benefit of going just audio only?
When you take away the visual cues, your ear has to work a lot harder, right?
Yes, it does.
You have to really tune in to those nuances of spoken English, like the rhythm, the intonation, the individual sounds.
And that's where you really start to pick up on the subtleties.
Exactly. Like, is that a question or are they emphasizing a certain word?
Right.
And podcasts and radio are great for that because they often use more like natural conversational speech. So you're exposed to a wider range of vocabulary and you start to develop fluency just through repeated exposure. Yeah. And news broadcasts can be helpful too because they tend to use more formal language and pronunciation.
But that's a good point. Okay, so this is something that I found really interesting.
Okay.
They emphasize the importance of listening to different accents and dialects.
Oh yeah, that's huge.
It is so... Why is that so important? Why not just focus on one standard accent?
Well, because English isn't just one thing,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
It's spoken in so many different ways around the world.
Yeah.
So by listening to various accents and dialects, you become a more well-rounded communicator.
You can understand anybody.
Pretty much, yeah. You'll be less likely to be thrown off by regional variations and you'll be able to understand and be understood by a wider range of people.
That's so important, especially in today's world.
It is. It's like broaden your horizons.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, and they also talk about the importance of like actively engaging with native speakers and not being afraid to ask questions, which sounds obvious, but why is that so valuable?
Because it's not enough to just be around native speakers. You have to actually interact with them.
Oh, okay.
You have to listen carefully, try to understand what they're saying, and don't be shy about asking for clarification.
Yeah, put yourself out there.
Exactly, because that real-time interaction gives you instant feedback.
Oh, like personalized coaching almost.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, let's move on to the second tip in the article.
Okay.
And this one is reading.
Reading. Oh, I love reading.
Me too. It's so relaxing.
It is.
The article calls it a fun and crucial way to learn effectively.
I get the crucial part.
Yeah, you're expanding your vocabulary, you're seeing grammar in action,
Right.
but fun.
Fun.
How can we make reading enjoyable and therefore more effective for learning English?
Well, I think the fun comes from discovering new things and expanding your world, right?
Yeah.
Reading exposes you to new information,
Yeah.
different perspectives, interesting stories.
Yeah.
And when you're interested in what you're reading, it doesn't feel like a chore.
It feels like a pleasure.
Exactly. And that makes it way more effective for learning. And plus, it's a great way to encounter new words and context. So you can actually understand their meaning. You see grammatical structures being used naturally, and you get exposed to different styles of writing.
So it's about that natural absorption.
Exactly. Your brain's just soaking it all up.
Yeah. Okay. So the article breaks down some specific reading techniques that can help.
Okay.
One of them is reading books to improve vocabulary, sentence patterns, and grammar while staying motivated.
Books are great for that.
They are. So what kind of books would you recommend for someone who's just starting out?
I would say start with books that are a little bit easier than what you would normally read in your native language,
Okay.
or books that are specifically designed for English language learners.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, because that way you can focus on the language itself without getting bogged down by a really complex plot or super advanced vocabulary.
Right.
And then as you get better, you can gradually move on to more challenging stuff.
Level up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the most important thing is to choose something that you're actually interested in.
Because you'll actually read it.
Yeah. Exactly. If you're not enjoying it, you're not going to stick with it.
That's true for anything, really.
Motivation is key.
For sure. Okay, so they also suggest starting with shorter texts, like articles or short stories.
Oh yeah, that's a good way to build confidence.
It is, because it's less intimidating.
You can finish them quickly and feel a sense of accomplishment.
And then you want to keep going.
Exactly. And they often focus on specific themes or vocabulary sets. So it's easier to grasp the new information.
Okay, another tip is using context clues to figure out the meaning of new words.
Oh yeah, context is everything.
It is. So how can we get better at doing that? Like, how can we decipher those little hints within the text?
Well, you have to pay attention to the words and sentences around the unfamiliar word
Okay.
and look for clues like synonyms, antonyms, explanations, examples.
So it's like being a detective almost.
Yeah, exactly. You're looking for evidence.
I love that. And this helps you understand the word more deeply than just looking it up in the dictionary.
For sure, because you're seeing how it's actually used.
Right. Okay, this next one I really like. They talk about joining book clubs or finding reading partners.
Oh, that's a great idea.
It is, because it adds a social element to reading.
Yeah, it's not so solitary.
Exactly. So why is that beneficial for learning English?
Well, because when you discuss what you've read with others, it helps you solidify your understanding.
You have to think about it more critically.
Yeah, and you get exposed to different interpretations and ways of expressing those ideas in English.
So you're learning from each other.
Exactly. And it's also a great way to practice speaking in a more relaxed environment.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, it's less pressure than like a formal presentation or something.
Exactly.
Okay. And then they talk about reading journals or diaries to get a feel for natural language and improve your own writing.
Oh, yeah. That's interesting.
Would you say that's more beneficial for advanced learners, or can beginners benefit from that too?
I think everyone can benefit from it.
Really?
Yeah, because it gives you a glimpse into how native speakers actually use the language in their everyday lives.
Oh, like how they really talk.
Exactly. You see how they structure their sentences, how they use idioms and slang, and how they express their emotions.
It's so valuable.
It is, because you're learning from real-life example.
Not just from textbooks.
Right.
Okay, and finally, they suggest reading aloud to practice pronunciation and intonation.
Oh, that's a good one.
It is so, I can see how hearing yourself speak can help bridge the gap between reading and speaking.
Because when you read aloud, you're forced to actually produce the sounds.
Yeah, you can't just skim over them.
Right. You become more aware of how your mouth and tongue are moving, and you can start to match your pronunciation to what you've heard.
Like imitating the sounds.
Exactly.
Huh.
And it also helps you develop a better sense of rhythm and intonation.
Which are so important for sounding natural.
They are, because intonation can change the meaning of what you're saying.
Oh, that's true. Okay, let's move on to tip number 3, which is all about trying to speak.
Okay, big one.
It is. And they call it an effective way to learn and practice, which makes sense.
Yeah, you have to actually use the language.
You can't just be passive about it.
Right.
So why is this active output so important?
Because it forces you to retrieve the vocabulary and grammar you've been learning and put it into practice.
You have to think on your feet.
Exactly. And the feedback you get from real conversations is invaluable.
Because you can see what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, you figure out where you need to improve.
So it's like testing your knowledge in the real world.
Exactly.
Okay, so they recommend making speaking practice a daily habit.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Even if it's just for like 10 or 15 minutes a day.
Yeah, consistency is key.
It is. Why is that so important?
Well, because those short bursts of practice add up over time.
Like little building blocks.
Yeah, and they help you solidify what you've learned and build your confidence.
So it's about making it a sustainable habit.
Exactly.
Okay, they also emphasize talking and listening to English speakers to improve pronunciation, grammar, and fluency. So it's really all connected, isn't it?
It is. That's like a cycle. You speak, you listen, you learn, you improve.
And then you repeat.
Exactly.
Okay, this one might be a little scary for some people, but they talk about recording yourself speaking to identify weak areas.
Oh, yeah. That can be a little intimidating.
It can be, but why is it so effective?
Because we don't always hear ourselves the way others hear us.
Oh, that's true.
So recording yourself gives you an objective perspective.
You can be your own critic.
Yeah, you can listen critically to your pronunciation and identify areas where you're stumbling.
And then focus on those areas.
Exactly.
Okay. They also advise focusing on speaking without fear of making mistakes, especially in the beginning.
Oh, that's so important.
It is, because I think that fear holds a lot of people back.
It does. People are so afraid of making mistakes that they don't even try.
Yeah, they get paralyzed.
Right, but the thing is, mistakes are part of the learning process.
Yeah, you can't learn without making mistakes.
Exactly. So don't be afraid to make them.
Just get the words out there.
Exactly. Just focus on communicating your message.
And the accuracy will come later.
It will with practice.
Okay, and this is a fun one. They suggest using storytelling and even reciting poetry to practice speaking.
Well, that's a cool idea.
It is so. Why are those methods so effective?
Well, they add a creative element to language learning.
Yeah, it's not just drills and exercises.
Right. Storytelling helps you develop your narrative skills and use a wider range of vocabulary and grammar.
And poetry helps with rhythm and pronunciation.
Yeah, it forces you to pay attention to the sounds and the intonation.
So it's a more engaging way to practice.
Exactly.
And finally, under trying to speak, they mention enrolling in English courses. So that provides a more structured and guided approach.
It does. You have a teacher who can correct you and give you feedback.
And you have classmates to practice with.
Right. It's a more formal learning environment.
Okay, let's move on to tip number 4, which is all about surrounding yourself with English.
Oh, immersion.
Yes, immersion. They describe this as a fun and effective way to learn quickly.
And it's because you're constantly exposed to the language.
Exactly. So it's about making English a part of your daily life, not just something you study for an hour a day.
Right. It's about creating that immersive environment.
So they suggest a few different ways to do this.
Like what?
One of them is practicing speaking with other learners.
Oh, yeah. Even if you're not both native speakers.
Right. So how effective is that? Could you end up reinforcing each other's mistakes?
Well, there is that risk,
Yeah.
but it's still a good way to practice because it creates a less intimidating environment.
You're all in the same boat.
Exactly. And you can learn from each other's mistakes.
Successes.
Right. And it builds a sense of community.
Yeah. You're all learning together.
Exactly.
Okay. Enrolling in English courses comes up again here as a way to create that immersion.
Yeah. Because in a good English course, you're surrounded by the language.
You're speaking it, you're listening to it, you're reading it.
Right. And you're interacting with other learners.
So the very immersive experience.
It is.
Okay, this next one is interesting. They talk about speaking in front of a mirror.
Oh, yeah. To practice your pronunciation and body language.
Exactly. So how does that help?
Well, when you see yourself speaking, you become more aware of your mouth movements and facial expressions.
Oh, okay.
And that can have a big impact on your pronunciation and your confidence.
It's like getting visual feedback.
Exactly. You can see what you look like and sound like.
And make adjustments.
Yeah.
Okay, engaging with English media is another big one.
Like movies, music, TV shows.
All of that. So this goes back to listening and reading, but it's also about creating that constant exposure.
Right. The more you surround yourself with English, the more your brain gets used to it.
It becomes more natural.
Exactly.
And they also talk about how immersion helps you understand the deeper meaning of the language, not just the literal definitions of words.
Right. Because you start to pick up on the nuances, the cultural context, the way native speakers actually use the language.
So it's about more than just memorizing vocabulary.
It is. It's about understanding the culture behind the language.
Okay, let's move on to tip number 5, which is writing.
Writing. Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
It is, they say that writing is a way to actively engage with grammar, vocabulary, and sentence structure.
It is, because you have to think more carefully about how you're using the language.
You have to put the pieces together yourself.
Exactly. And that helps you identify your errors and solidify your understanding of the rules.
So it's not just about expressing yourself creatively.
It's also about practicing the mechanics of the language.
Okay, so they recommend starting with small and simple sentences.
Oh, yeah, that's a good way to build confidence.
It is. Why is that?
Well, because when you're first starting out, it's easy to get overwhelmed by the complexity of English grammar.
Yeah, there's so many rules.
There are. So starting with short, simple sentences allows you to focus on the basics.
Like the foundation.
Exactly. And then you can build from there.
Okay, and then they talk about practicing writing regularly, even if it's just a few sentences each day.
Consistency is important.
It always is. So why is that so crucial for writing?
Well, because the more you write, the better you'll get at it.
Yeah, it's like anything else, practice makes perfect.
Exactly. And even writing a little bit each day helps you reinforce what you've learned and develop fluency.
Okay, seeking feedback on your writing is another key point.
Oh, yeah, that's so valuable.
It can be tough to hear criticism, though.
It can be, but it's important to remember that it's about helping you improve.
Right? Not about putting you down.
Exactly. And another person can often see errors that you might miss yourself.
Like a fresh pair of eyes.
Yeah, they can give you a different perspective.
Okay. And they also suggest using prompts and structure to guide your writing practice.
Oh, that's a good way to get started.
It is. So how does that work?
Well, a prompt gives you a topic to write about,
Okay.
and a structure gives you a framework to follow.
So it's less daunting.
Yeah, you don't have to stare at a blank page and wonder what to write.
Okay. And finally, they emphasize being patient with yourself.
Oh, yeah, that's huge.
It is. Why is patience so important in the writing process?
Because writing well takes time and practice.
It's not something you can learn overnight.
Exactly.
Just don't get discouraged if you don't see results immediately.
You take practicing.
Yeah, and focus on gradual improvement.
Okay, let's move on to tip number 6, which is all about building your English vocabulary.
Vocabulary, oh, that's the bread and butter of language.
It's essential for understanding and expressing yourself.
Right, without a good vocabulary, you're very limited in what you can say and understand.
Yeah, it's like trying to build a house without bricks.
Exactly.
So they give some pretty standard advice here. Things like reading widely, playing word games, keeping a vocabulary journal.
All good strategies.
They are.
Yeah.
But is there one that you find to be particularly effective?
I think they all work best when combined.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, like reading exposes you to new words in context. Word games make learning fun.
Yeah.
A vocabulary journal helps you keep track of new words.
And memorization techniques help you remember them.
Right, so it's about finding what works best for you and using a combination of methods.
Yeah, like a personalized approach.
Yep. Okay, and they also talk about the importance of using new words in conversation.
Oh, yeah, you have to actually use them.
You do. You can't just memorize them and then forget about them.
Right, you have to put them into practice.
So it's about making them a part of your active vocabulary.
Exactly.
All right, let's move on to tip number 7, which is learning English grammar rules.
Grammar. Oh, yeah, the dreaded grammar.
I know a lot of people find it intimidating.
They do, but it's essential for speaking and writing correctly.
It's the framework of the language.
Exactly.
So they suggest starting with the basics, things like verb tenses, pronunciation, and sentence structure.
Those are the building blocks.
They are. So why is it important to start with those?
Well, because you need a solid foundation before you can move on to more complex grammar concepts.
Right. You can't build a skyscraper on a weak foundation.
Exactly.
Okay, they also talk about using online grammar resources and watching informative videos.
Oh, yeah. There are so many great resources available online.
There are. It's amazing.
It is. You can find websites, apps, videos that cover every aspect of English grammar.
So there's no excuse for not learning.
Pretty much.
Okay, this one is a little different. They suggest practicing tongue twisters.
Tongue twisters. Oh, yeah. Those are fun.
They are. So how do those help with grammar?
Well, they're mainly for pronunciation
Okay.
because they help you practice specific sounds and sound combinations.
Yeah.
But they can also indirectly reinforce certain grammar structures.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, like the correct use of articles or verb conjugations.
It's like a bonus.
Yeah.
Okay, they also emphasize seeking help when you have doubts.
Oh, yeah. Don't be afraid to ask questions.
It's okay to not know everything.
It is. Everyone starts somewhere.
Exactly. And they also talk about using grammar checker tools.
Oh, yeah. Those can be helpful.
They can, but they're not perfect.
Right. They're just a tool.
Yeah, you still need to understand the grammar rules yourself.
Exactly. Don't rely on them too much.
And finally, they recommend engaging with formal English learning courses again. So why is that so beneficial for grammar?
Well, because courses provide a structured and comprehensive approach to learning grammar.
Yeah, you cover everything in a logical order.
Exactly. And you have a teacher to guide you and answer your questions.
So it's a more systematic way to learn.
It is.
All right, let's move on to tip number 8, which is practice pronunciation.
Pronunciation. Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
It is, because clear pronunciation is essential for effective communication.
Right. You can have perfect grammar and a huge vocabulary.
But if people can't understand you, it doesn't matter.
Exactly. Pronunciation is key.
Okay, so they recommend a few different ways to practice pronunciation.
Like what?
One of them is engaging in conversations to get a feel for tone rhythm and intonation.
Oh, yeah, those are so important.
They can completely change the meaning of what you're saying.
Exactly. So listening to how native speakers use them is crucial.
And then they talk about identifying specific sounds that you find challenging and practicing them repeatedly.
Yeah, that's a good strategy.
It is so, how do you figure out which sounds to focus on?
Well, pay attention to what you struggle with when you're speaking.
Okay.
Like, do you have trouble with the teth sound or the R sound?
Yeah.
Once you know which sounds are difficult for you, you can find specific exercises to practice them.
And just keep practicing until you get it right.
Exactly.
Okay. They also suggest using audio recording apps and websites to practice saying words, phrases, and sentences.
Oh, yeah, those are great tools.
They are, because you can record yourself and then compare your pronunciation to a native speaker.
Yeah, and you can track your progress over time.
See how much you've improved.
Exactly.
And of course, they recommend speaking with native English speakers as much as possible because there's no substitute for that real-life interaction.
Right, you get immediate feedback and you learn how native speakers actually use the language.
So it's the best way to improve your pronunciation.
It is.
Okay. And finally, they suggest listening to English songs and trying to sing along.
Oh, yeah, that's a fun one.
It is so, how does that help with pronunciation?
Well, when you sing along to a song, you have to match the rhythm, melody, and pronunciation of the singer.
Yeah.
And that helps you develop a better feel for the natural flow of English.
So it's a more enjoyable way to practice.
Exactly.
Okay, let's move on to tip number 9, which is start thinking in English.
Oh, yeah, that's a game changer.
It is, because it means you're no longer translating everything in your head,
Right, you're starting to think in English directly.
which is a huge step towards fluency.
It is, because it speeds up your thinking and speaking.
So how do you make that shift? How do you start thinking in English?
They recommend doing things like listening to English music and podcasts, watching movies and TV shows, changing the language settings on your devices, and even talking to yourself in English.
Talking to yourself.
Yeah, it might sound weird, but it works.
So it's about creating that immersive environment in your own mind.
Exactly.
Okay, and our 10th and final tip is learning English with translation technique.
Translation.
So they say this is a simple and effective method, especially for beginners.
Yeah, it can be helpful for understanding the meaning of new words and phrases.
Right, so it's like a bridge between your native language and English.
Exactly.
Okay, so how can we use translation effectively?
Well, they suggest using translation software, practicing translation daily, paying attention to grammar and sentence structure in both languages,
Okay.
and watching movies and TV shows with subtitles in your native language.
So it's about using your existing knowledge to your advantage,
Exactly.
but the goal is to eventually move beyond translation and think in English directly.
Right, because translation can be a crutch.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
We've gone through all 10 tips from the Fast Info Class article.
Learn English fast.
Yes.
Yeah.
Learn English fast in 10 effective ways.
I like it.
Yeah. And what's really stood out to me is the emphasis on active learning.
Yeah, you can't just passively absorb information
You have to actively engage with the language.
through listening, reading, speaking, and writing.
And creating that immersive environment is so important.
It is. It's about making English a part of your daily life.
And not being afraid to make mistakes.
Exactly. Mistakes are part of the process.
So to wrap things up, I have a question for you, the listener.
Okay.
Looking back at these 10 tips, which one do you think you could start using today?
Yeah. Which one resonated with you the most?
Exactly. What's one small change you can make right now that will help you learn English more effectively?
Yeah. What's your first step?
Because every journey starts with a single step.
It does. And the sooner you start, the sooner you'll reach your goal.
So get out there and start learning.
Have fun with it.
And enjoy the process.
You got this.
We believe in you.
We do.